to you all. Let me first start by welcoming you here today for the International Albinism Awareness Day Zimbabwe 2022. My name is Shamiso Winetimpara, the Executive Director for Environmental Body Zimbabwe. I appreciate all our partners for making this day a possibility. They include Signs of Hope, Innovation Village for Young African Minds, Environmental Body Zimbabwe, Young Volunteers for the Environment, Wildlife Conservation Action, Network for Social Change, and our technical partners. Today is June 13, International Albinism Awareness Day. On December 18, 2014, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution establishing June 13 as International Albinism Awareness Day. This historic resolution confirmed the global focus on albinism advocacy. The question is why? Globally, people with albinism have been facing heinous discrimination as a result of most of us not really understanding the condition known as albinism. This is why the theme for this year is well placed to address several issues people with albinism continue to face. The theme is working together to make the voices of marginalized groups heard. This theme is geared to, number one, promote and celebrate solidarity among groups of people with albinism. Number two, raise the voices and visibility of people with albinism in all aspects of life. Number three, draw attention to the predicament of people with albinism in the face of climate change. Lastly, to encourage people to plant trees as a climate change mitigation measure. Besides the cultural and economic threats to their lives, people with albinism are faced with a bigger threat which is not being talked about enough, which is climate change and global warming. Climate change, like any other social problem, impacts people differently depending on their status and ability to cope with various environmental threats. Climate change affects us all, but more for people with albinism. We are in the same ocean, but different boats. Our normal sun was already too hot for people with albinism 100 years ago, and it's worse now. The 1.5 degree target for the Paris Agreement, which calls for countries to take concerted climate action to reduce greenhouse gas emission in order to limit global warming, might not be enough for people with albinism. They are advocating for even lower temperatures. Let's help them amplify their voices. International Albinism Awareness Day is not just observed. It's a day to celebrate their resilience, perseverance, and achievements, despite them having to do with cultural misconception, economic and environmental discrimination, and violence. 13 June is a call to action. Time to act is now. We need to work hard to support the most vulnerable groups in our society. Let's work on bringing more people with albinism to the table so that they make decisions on issues that affect them. We need to protect and fulfill the human rights of all persons with albinism as stipulated in the Sustainable Development Goals. They include no poverty, SDG 1, zero hunger, SDG 2, good health and well-being, SDG 3, quality education, SDG 4, decent work, SDG 8, climate action, SDG 13, and partnership for the goals, SDG 17. As organizers for this event, we are grateful to the United Nations for doing a splendid job of promoting the rights of persons with albinism. But a lot still needs to be done to demystify albinism, educate the world about albinism, and most importantly, end discrimination. Globally, persons with albinism have had different experiences. The real question is, what are the stories of people with albinism in Zimbabwe? Invited panelists from persons with albinism community will shed more light into albinism in Zimbabwe. They will share on challenges, threats, joys, and most importantly about possible opportunities for collaboration in order to amplify their voices. Our first speaker is Gwen Mushonga, who will talk about the biology behind albinism. Thank you. Once again, welcome. Over to you, Gwen.
And yeah, this one, the ocular cutaneous, also is a number of types. It has three main types. There are three main types of ocular cutaneous albinism, namely ocular cutaneous 1, 2, and 3. But I'm going to focus on the type 2, which is more common in Africa. Yes, albinism is found in all the worldwide. But in Africa, there's a common type which is found in Africa. So we were on the main types of which are found in Africa, of albinism, which are found in Africa, which are more common in Africa. And yeah, that's ocular cutaneous 2, which I said one is born with fair skin, fair hair, and usually eyesight problems. And it's not only, we talk of the society as our biggest enemy, but it's not only the society which is our biggest enemy. There are issues to do with the sun. I'm sure one of my colleagues is going to talk about that one, where when they're going to talk about the climate change, the sun is also our biggest enemy. I'm sure my colleague will touch on that one. And let me move on and talk about albinism in Africa. The challenge why albinism is so much, of a talk in Africa is because, Africa is mostly populated by dark pigment, people with dark skin, and for a couple to give birth to a white child with albinism, it often comes with misunderstandings, accusations, mistrust. And now in the search of what causes albinism, then there comes, the issue of superstitious beliefs, the false myths, where people just assume what albinism could be because they don't understand what albinism is. And this has resulted in those with albinism facing stigma, all kinds of social injustices from their family members and, from the members of the societies. It's even worse in some African countries where persons with albinism are being killed, because of false beliefs, where they think if they get maybe in my hair, if they get maybe a part of my finger or any other of my body parts, they believe that they can make money out of our body parts, of which these are all just false beliefs. And this has happened in Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, only to name a few countries where people with albinism are being, hunted and killed for ritual purposes. And this, this is so sad for the albinism community. And looking in Zimbabwe, there are no reports of killings of persons with albinism, but there is great stigma and discrimination when it comes to persons with albinism. We are made to feel like we are not human beings. We are not equal human beings because of the way we are treated by the society, the way, we are just being segregated. And that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge in Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, the stigma and the discrimination then hinders us as persons with albinism from living a normal life like any other human being. The challenges, are from those comes from the false beliefs. Then they result in us, facing a lot of social stigma. You find that within our community, people might think that, albinism is contagious. They don't want to come near me. They don't want to associate with me. And that's all, has a negative connotation on persons with albinism. And this only does not stop there with the stigma and discrimination. You find that stigma and discrimination sometimes, as persons with albinism, it's difficult for us to get employed, even if we are educated, if we are qualified or overqualified. Just because I've got a skin condition which is different from the rest of the people, that hinders me from being employed. Not because I'm not qualified, just because they feel maybe we might scare away their customers, maybe people might not come to get their services, and as a result, a number of people with albinism are not employed, and they live below the poverty line. And also, it doesn't stop there. Because I'm not employed, I cannot, even when it comes to accommodation. Yes, the stigma, the landlords do not want us to be their tenants. I cannot afford to pay their rents. And just because I have albinism, they don't want me to stay at their house. And even when it comes to marriages, relationships for young girls, it's a challenge. The situation is much better for our brothers with albinism as long as they are financially stable. They can take care of their family, of their wives. But the situation for women with albinism is not even, it's difficult for us, to find love and for our in-laws to accept us. And also there is the challenge with myth. There are some men who believe that, women with albinism, we can cure their deadly diseases, be it, HIV, and now the pandemic. There was talks of, us being cures of the pandemic, or as persons with albinism having brought the pandemic. And so this is so devastating to persons with albinism. And these are all caused by what? By false beliefs. And, so let me just move on because of our time. And all these challenges have, the above mentioned atrocities and poor treatment of persons with albinism in Africa is what motivated the United Nations to set aside the 13th of June as the International Albinism Day, in the hope that they could, amplify the voices of persons with albinism, trying to raise stigma at a global platform. Hence, they decided that if we're to celebrate Albinism Day on the 13th of each month, 13th of June of each year, it will help us, to amplify our voice, to take, our space, to take our, positions in various spaces, be it in the national issues, political issues, and they were just hoping that it can be used as a tool to empower persons with albinism. So it was just there, to say people with albinism are human rights, are human beings. They have human rights too, and they should be treated as such with dignity and respect like any other human being. This day was first commemorated in 2015. It didn't just come about. They didn't just wake up and say, we're going to have International Albinism Day. No, it took a lot of work. There was a lot of advocacy from our international stakeholders, most people, within the African continent, organizations within the African continent. There was a huge cry because of what was happening to persons with albinism and the way persons with albinism were being treated. And hence, the 13th of June being set aside to commemorate persons with albinism. The intention was to raise awareness and also to amplify, like I mentioned above, voices of those with albinism, hoping to stop these barbaric acts and unfair treatment of persons with albinism. It is my hope that, this webinar from this platform, all those present here, will leave the webinar armed with more information and be able to take home one or two things about albinism as a condition, not as a disease, not as something, that is contagious. And it is my hope and wish that we continue to see and witness more engagement of this nature as we continue to create inclusive platforms, as organizations and companies and institutes, whenever you're having, gatherings, whenever you're having programs, just make sure you invite a person with albinism, a person with a disability, so that we continue creating inclusive platforms where we feel that no one is left behind, where, where we work together and, where we hold the ladder for each other. And thank you so much for listening. That's all I had to say. And thank you so much for being part of this amazing platform.
Thank you so much, Gwen, for presenting such a touching presentation. It's so sad to see human beings discriminating each other. But I believe from today going onwards, we'll be able to work together, create different platforms where we include everyone, leaving no one behind. So right now, I will move on to the second presenter, who is Taurai Chako, on the topic, My Life as a Person with Albinism. Those who just joined us, please register yourselves on the chat box. And also, if you have any question, please put that question in the chat box. Then we'll continue with the preliminary session after the presentations. Thank you. Over to you, Taurai.
What I'll do, I'll just mention a few things that I've experienced. I was also told that my name from birth, Taurai, It was a name given by my mother that people were talking about my mother, saying she has just given birth to an albino. You know, those community people will be talking about issues, and then mama has to say, "Taura yenyu, but nini mwana wangu data say, you know, brother." So I think it's been a long journey, the life experience from the start already, to such an extent that somehow back then my father departed home because of me, and from my childhood up to now, there are so many challenges, which most of them were discussed. When talked about those, um, I have one experience in the workplace, which I always talk about wherever I go, and that experience touched me so much that I always talk about that. I was working at a certain consultancy company in Mount Pleasant back about 3-4 years ago. But now within that consultancy company, it was a high pressure environment. We had to do bidding, we had to do project management proposals and so on for regional international consultants projects. So now the challenge is when it comes to the computer, I had to focus too closely to my computer in order to deliver my duties. So one of the company administrators came to me and said, you embarrass us when our clients come and see one of our employees is focusing on the computer like that." He said, "Why are you looking at your computer like you are kissing it?" So from that, I thought, should I take someone to court? But no, I was so worried that I had to pretend as if I'm doing something on the computer, yet I wasn't doing anything. A lot of issues that happens within the workplace that need to be addressed. We still need a lot of enforcement in terms of our local statutory instruments, in terms of our constitution, and in terms of the UNCRPD within the workplace, which is why I also joined and formed one of the growing up labor union that is also targeting persons with disabilities, because we don't have, effective force in the workplace where persons with disabilities are fully represented in terms of legal perspectives. In terms of issues of reasonable accommodation in the workplace, a lot of people doesn't really understand what is it all about when we talk about reasonable accommodation in the workplace and what should be done. Most think it's an expensive thing, but it needs all of us to get united in order to make our voices heard, which is one of the main thrust for this set day, set by the United Nations for raising awareness on albinism. So I think, in short, that's what I can say for now. Maybe the question and answers, maybe to explore more, but I think that's what I can say. And also on a different note, I would want to tell you that I engaged the chief executive officer for ZUPCO in the morning today about this day. Now, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes ago, I received a call saying, "You guys, we can assist you. If you need any space in our buses to raise awareness messages, you can just bring, and we can give you space on our buses. For example, stickers." And so the ball is now in our court whether we need to raise, to make impact in terms of raising awareness. But already the CEO for ZUPCO has granted us permission to raise our awareness messages on the buses. So that's one interesting message I can also share with you.
Okay, thank you so much, Taurai. They say together we stand, divided we fall. Thank you for that presentation. Right now, I move on to the third presenter who is going to present on climate change, biodiversity conservation, and albinism, who is Brenda Mhlanga. And for those who joined late, please register yourselves in the chat box as well. If you have questions, don't forget to put them in the chat box.
No need for me to Jesus slide.
Over to you, Brenda.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share on this day, which is very special to us. I really appreciate and I really feel honored to be part of the panelists and to be sharing what I believe has to be shared today. So, just like our moderator has said, I'm going to present on albinism and climate change. So, albinism and climate change, I'll go on with the first topic, that is, what is climate change is the first thing that I'm going to define. Climate change is the significant long-term change in the global temperatures. This is climate change tinoona kuti ndicho zvinhu kuchinja kuri kuita mamiriro ekunze according to scientists kuti kana kunze kwanga kuchimbonaya pamwe it can be seasonal, it can be a long term count, inokwanisa kunga iri zvenzimbo zvetime yakakura, kumwe kunenge kuchinaya kunokwanisa kunga kusingachanayi, kumwe kunobva kwawedzera temperatures, all in all. And global warming, this is when temperatures specifically are increasing, and usually we know good global temperatures increase, they are increasing, and scientifically, according to the IPCC report, the recent IPCC report, the world is predicted to have increased temperatures by an addition of around 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is a very big increase. And temperature increases, like we are talking to the people who are maybe the people who has no albinism, but already to the albinism community, the already normal temperatures, they are already too high for us. Meaning to say, increase temperatures, it's already extreme for the albinism community. So which leaves us at a very big risk of exposure to long periods of sun. So on my second slide, it's showing this is the original on the first on the left side. This is the original Earth that was there, but because of people emitting a lot of gases into the atmosphere, the original setup has been disturbed. The original setup is no longer the same, which is causing a lot of sun to the atmosphere, which is causing a lot of sun rays which is being trapped in the atmosphere. And this is very dangerous to the people with albinism, because when albinism vaine skin isingakwanisi skin yavo haikwanisi kugadzira the most important pigment that is called melanin. Saka kana tine melanin, tisina melanin muskin, zvinoreva kuti the sun that comes to our skin, we cannot absorb it, we cannot hatikwanisi kuita fight against it. So that is those novas a rise to my third slide on the impact of climate change to the albinism community. I'm seeing we are seeing that from the picture, we are seeing these are the most types of cancers that are usually associated with people with disabilities. And we see the first type of cancer, the most one, which is not the rare but not really effective one. We have the basal cell, and we have the carcinoma, we have the squamous cell carcinoma, and the most dangerous one, which is melanoma. These are the cancers that are mostly related with people with albinism due to the exposure to the sun. And we see that people with albinism, this is a breach to the standard goals that were said. Like, people were allowed, we should have health. That was one of the goals, to have health. But because the sun is too hot and the climate is increasingly high, is increasingly in temperatures, the people with albinism are suffering from cancers. Then another thing is people with albinism, usually when we were growing up, some of us, we did not understand it, but as we grow up, we discover that we have short sight. And as we have short sight, this is a very critical issue, because especially when we want, for education purposes, we would want to go to school, and some people with albinism are not really educated, because the expense of attending classes is very high, as they will be putting extra effort for them to learn, for them to gain general education, for them to gain maybe the things that are learned. They have to put an extra effort. Usually, it was, for example, from my own experiences, I would have to go in front of the class, just like sitting on the table, very close. And this is because as the sun rays come into our eyes, we cannot reflect them properly. So our eyes are affected. We cannot take in a lot of light into our eyes. So we need aid of glasses, which are expensive. We need aid of glasses, which are expensive. And most people with albinism, they come from poverty-stricken households, and they cannot afford it. And moving on to the next slide, people with albinism, they for our skins naturally, they cannot take, our skins naturally, like I said earlier, they cannot produce, we cannot produce our own melanin. And so for us to be able to have melanin, maybe an additional melanin, we need to have proper diets. And for those diets, some of them are, there is special amino acids that are needed in the production of melanin. And the main amino acids needed, we need tyrosine, and we need tryptophan. And all those melanins, we found them from foods such as, the major foods such as fish, such as almonds, such as beans, and such dishes. Some of them, due to climate change, the production of such foods is altered. And even if in places where it's found, the food is found, but it's very expensive. So as people with albinism, coming from poverty-stricken backgrounds, we cannot afford some of those foods. So usually people with albinism, they suffer because they cannot afford to have the diets that are really necessary, that are really needed, so that we can counteract the production of melanin in our skin. Another issue is people with disabilities. According to our society, usually people with disabilities are marginalized, and most of them, we live in poverty. Usually when people, just like the previous speaker was saying from his own experiences, usually when people with disabilities, like when a child with albinism is born in a family, usually there are conflicts and there are a lot of things that happen, and usually some of them lead to the splitting of the family. So usually most of the people with disabilities, they are raised by single parents, and for one parent, usually the mother, to take care of the child is really expensive. as they cannot afford the really basic needs that are needed, the food, the diet, the sunscreen lotions, which are very expensive. For example, the Nivea. For you to have Nivea, a single bottle of Nivea is going for around $14 to $35 a bottle, and for us to use it in these conditions where the sun is increasingly becoming hot, it's you can use one bottle for around maybe 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks you need another bottle, which means for a month I need around a budget of around $70 US for buying sunscreens. And for most families, they cannot afford that. So mostly people with disabilities, they suffer from cancer because they cannot afford to buy all those sunscreens. Another thing is opportunities to participate in conservation and biodiversity. Sorry, my slides doesn't include that. It's opportunities to participate in conservation and biodiversity. So as much as people with disabilities, we are the most people who are affected by climate change. And we are the most people who are supposed to be acting and doing most in conservation. But as much as we want to do that, there are challenges that hinders us from doing conservation. And usually the most available post for conservation is usually you can either be a forester or a game ranger, and all those opportunities they provide, they are usually outdoor activities. And because the sun is the most enemy to the albinism community, we cannot take longer periods at outdoors. So that on its own is a great challenge. So most people are hindered in conservation because it's an outdoor thing and they cannot participate. So the only thing that can be done, and for people with albinism to be included, is when the organizations that are into conservation, generally all organizations has to practice whereby they practice inclusion to people with disabilities by providing clerical posts. These are posts whereby people with albinism usually are given posts to work indoors, or they are given time slots where they can work maybe from morning to maybe around 10 o'clock. When the sun is not really hot, then they can continue afterwards. Maybe a time schedule that can allow working with minimum sun exposure, or when people or they can offer protective clothing that helps in covering the people from the sun, or they can offer free sunscreens for people with albinism. That will be part of the team, so that the people with albinism can be included also in the conservation field. Another thing that can be done is the practice of eating foods. The practice of eating foods. The practice of eating foods that are cheap, the readily available foods that are cheap to us, and that helps us also in the production of the melanin. Another issue that affects the albinism community is usually we come from a background where our staple is corn and maize, but the most harmful food to the people with albinism, and the most harmful food to the production of melanin within our bodies is corn. So because of poverty, we end up consuming corn, which is harmful. So people should practice eating fruits like bananas, the millets, and the avocados. This helps us in the production of melanin. And in the long term, to fighting against climate change and the well-being of people with albinism, organizations or even individuals should learn to practice to reduce emission of greenhouse gases, and planting of trees, and capacity building, education and awareness of people. People should be educated on things that should be done, on the harmful effects of climate change to people, even to our environment. So people should be learned so that they act responsible whenever they are doing their day-to-day jobs, and influence. And also organizations should also influence policymakers. This is whereby policies that promote climate change and disabilities has to be put in place whenever climate change issues are being discussed. Such policies should be included, and people with disabilities, especially people with albinism, should be taken note of before anything that concerns climate change is put in place. So thank you so much. This was my presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Brenda. You have touched a lot of things there, because if we take a look at the SDG number 4, 8, 11, 17, they talk about inclusion. Especially the 8th one says promoting sustainable, inclusive and sustainable growth for all, and also productive employment and decent work for all, meaning that everyone is the right to a safe job, to a better job, or a safe working condition. So if we all work together, we'll be able to achieve the SDGs as well as supporting each other. Because if we take a look, we might find out that some of the people here in Zimbabwe, they are not focusing on the albinism part, yet they are the ones who are the most vulnerable groups from the climate change. So thank you so much for the presentations. Right now, we'll move on to the preliminary session. You have the question here from Miranda saying, are there any organizations donating these sunscreens for the underprivileged? Also, those who have questions, please either you raise your hand or you put the question in the chat box. So over to you, the presenters. The question is, are there any organizations donating these sunscreens for the underprivileged? Thank you.
Yes, there are a number of organizations donating sunscreen, but though it is not enough. That's what most organizations are trying to do, donating sunscreen lotions. But I believe that, instead of donating sunscreen lotions, we should empower persons with albinism so that an individual is able to purchase the sunscreen lotion for themselves. Yes, it's good. Most of the organizations, we are sourcing here and there to get sunscreen lotions, but we'll never be able, to cover the whole of Zimbabwe. But if we are in a position of empowering persons with albinism across Zimbabwe, across all the different provinces they're in, then a person is able to purchase, their own sunscreen lotion instead of, waiting upon donations, living on charity. We are trying to do away with the charity model. And instead of, we should come up with ways of empowering our people so that, like we were saying, instead of giving the person the fish, we should teach them how to fish. So yeah, that's the response. Yes, some people are getting lotions and some people are not really getting lotions. It just depends with how much lotions or bottles of lotions we get and where are you located. And some people in the rural areas of Zimbabwe are left without, getting lotions even for a year or even more than a year.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gwen. Yeah, that's the truth. We need to be capacitated so that people can be able to purchase these creams, because we cannot rely on the donations. Is there anyone with a contribution to the presenters? Okay, anyone with a question or a contribution, you can raise your hand. Also, okay, there is a question from Chiedza. She's saying, what part can we play in helping to empower? What part can we play in helping to empower?
Testing where information, participating, like the collaborations and partnerships. I was thinking to maybe my activities, why I take a list, which are informed the part of the laws that I don't know if it makes sense.
Oh, okay. Also, maybe I can share my thoughts on how we can empower. Empowering someone starts from empowering them, educating them about their rights. When it comes to persons with albinism, as persons, we tend to look down upon ourselves because of the stigma which is there. And as a result, even if there are opportunities, I always say if there are opportunities meant for women, as women with albinism, we should go and grab those. No opportunity will come and say women with albinism. So if we start from, educating, self-awareness is important as an empowerment tool. If we educate them on their rights, that everyone is, they should be awarded their rights as human beings. And also if we look at what type of small projects can they do away from the sun, which can help them to live a sustainable life. So when we talk of empowerment, it touches on a number of issues. So when we talk of partnerships, it also depends with what another organization is doing. And maybe you can say, you guys, we are into human rights, human rights defenders and, or advocacy. What can we do for persons with albinism? Or someone can say, we're into climate change. How best can we work together? Or we're into poetry. What can we do for persons with albinism? Or it just depends with what the other stakeholders are working on, so that we don't have to set up a whole new thing, a whole different thing. We can just work together with those structures which are already there, rather than starting a whole different project. We can just come and create partnerships and work from start from the bottom, or start from where other organizations are working from, and we see a way of working together. So that's what I think when we speak of empowerment.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. Right now I have Asha, the hand is up. Please add your contribution.
Thank you so much, the moderator. I don't know that you can hear me. My name is Asha. Joining in from Kampala, Uganda. I am not a person with albinism, but I'm a person with dwarfism and an advocate for the rights and full inclusion of other persons with disabilities. I'm very passionate. I have personal friends with albinism. I wanted to just stress one thing. Most of the presenters have touched on this point, and it's about creating awareness or self-advocacy. Personally, this has worked for me very well, using myself to tell the stories of people with dwarfism. So I would encourage persons with albinism to tell their own stories. No one knows your living condition better than yourself. No one is going to come and save you. Not the policymakers, not your leaders, not the donors. So we need to empower persons with albinism, starting from the family level, to speak up, to stand up for themselves, tell their stories, and change the narrative. Because I realize that most of the stigma discrimination comes from ignorance. So if we can help to teach others about our conditions, I think that would be empowering enough. Education is definitely key, skilling, but I know that the starting point should be driving awareness and awareness and awareness. Thank you so much. It was an informative and insightful discussion today. I'm glad to take part.
Okay, thank you, Asha. The next person is Shamiso. Shamiso, your hand is up.
I wanted to talk about empowering from my experiences as a child with albinism, I have discovered that the most thing that we are robbed of from a young age as people with albinism is our self-esteem and even self-confidence. So what maybe the most way that we can empower our young people with albinism, our young kids with albinism, is to make sure that as a society, we stand out and give them the confidence that they need, the self-esteem that they need. This means from a primary school student, even when we are doing leadership sessions, we need prefects. Let's make sure we include our young people. If we cannot give them the whole confidence, but the fact that we include them in some of the things that will be happening around us as a society will help, will go a long way even to those children. So like what I was saying, from a young age, when you are doing things, being in church services, being in school, we have to make sure that we take those children with albinism, we include them in decision making. We give them tasks they must feel that we are part of the planet, and the responsibility of taking care of the planet lies in our hands. We are the people of the world, and we belong to the world, and we belong to the society. I think that's one way that we can use to empower most people with albinism. Then another way that we can empower is maybe hospitals, or in hospital, or whenever a parent gives birth to a child with albinism. I think it is wise, or it is good, that the nurses or the health workers are taught on how to counsel the parents who gave birth to children with disabilities, and how they are supposed to take care, or how they are supposed to nurse their kids from a young age, from a tender age, until they are people who are old enough to stand for themselves. Another thing that we can do again to empower the albinism community is giving them chances. Like when I was saying, even in opportunities, in jobs, there are a lot of things that we cannot do as people with albinism, like what you are saying, we cannot open. But that one should not be a stigma, but it has to be a way that should show the community that we are different. We have to show people that though we are different, we can also do other things. So by giving positions to people with albinism who are already at a better position, and giving them as models to the young rising people, will give the young ones motivation. Will give the young one motivation they can really feel. So it's good that even as parents, we show our children the examples of people maybe with albinism who have done it in life, so that at least they can see that we are not really, we are human beings, we can also do it. Thank you, that was my contribution.
Thank you so much, Shamiso, for that contribution. Let me give this opportunity to Samantha. Samantha, are you there?
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, I had typed my question in the chat box to say, what are the policies and legislation that are available on albinism, and what would people with albinism like to see in the legislation of our country, and also in the SADC or Africa, pertaining to the plight of persons with albinism? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll give this question to the presenters. The question is, in terms of legislation, what is in place and what provisions would people with albinism like to see? If you can help us with the answers, please.
For me, I want to say on legislation, on the existing laws, policies, and regulations. I think you would also note that since our current act, the Disabled People's Act of 1992, hasn't mentioned albinism within it. And so albinism is one of the forgotten species, which is not also mentioned in most of the existing legislation. So what we'd want to see is locally contextualized policies that really touch on us and also speaks to most of us. So we would want to see our voices within those legislative policies and laws. And by that, we can yield something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Taurai. Let me move on to the next person. That's Beyond. You have a question, Beyond Mhlanga.
Oh, hello everyone. So can you hear me, MC?
Yes, I can hear you.
So it's like most of the things that I wanted to explain was taken through by Shamiso, but I would like to share my experience and how I turned up to accept people with the albinism. I grew up from an environment where those people with the albinism were very few. The only one that I knew was Taurai, the previous speaker. So I want to say I up myself to understand that people with the albinism are just people like us by interaction with the Taurai. I became a friend to Taurai through my brother, who was the best friend for him. And that's how I learned and understand that people with the albinism are just like us. And for the empowering and involvement in the society, involvement itself is something that a person without albinism can learn how those people are and how they live. Also, to learn that there is no difference between normal people without albinism and those people with the albinism. So like Shami said, I would like to say involvement of those people with albinism will let people learn a bit by bit to understand those people. So whenever we are in environments, be it at work, be it at school, let those guys participate in each and every moment as people give their attention. So I want to say involvement of those can help us naturally to teach everyone how to accept people with the albinism. And the rest that I wanted to say has been said by Shami. So I would like to say thank you for your time. MC, take your mic.
Thank you so much, Beyond. Right now, I'll just read out the last two questions because of our time. We are now behind. We're supposed to finish at 4 o'clock. It's now 7 past. So the last two questions, the first one is, in what ways can organizations improve their physical structures to accommodate the albinism community? For example, I know you can build a ramp for someone in a wheelchair. And the second question is, are there countries that are still killing albinos? And what part is the UN through the Human Rights Charter done about that? So those are our last two questions.
So I'll take the one about persons with albinism. Are they still being killed in, especially in African countries, like I've mentioned, in Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, Tanzania, yes. Persons with albinism are still being killed, and a lot of talks. Okay, for starters, the United Nations then appointed the United Nations person for persons with albinism, a rapporteur for persons with albinism from the United Nations, who was moving about all these countries that I have mentioned, engaging the governments, the policemakers, the justice systems, and the legal, all the legal structures in those countries. We've seen that when persons with albinism were being killed, the perpetrators were not brought to book, they were not brought to justice. It was just said a person has been killed, a person has been, have had their hand cut off, and nothing was being done to the perpetrators who are being, abused. those persons, the cases are followed up. So we've come with the mechanism where we teach people on how to report such cases. We teach the villagers or the communities on how to protect persons with albinism within their societies. We teach them on how to when there is evidence, on how to gather evidence where there are attacks. So a lot has been done to make sure that, the killings stop and the perpetrators are brought to justice. So yeah, that's what has been done in some African countries where people with albinism are still being killed, but the numbers have declined a bit. But once in a while, once in a month, you hear that someone has been killed in Zambia, someone's hand has been cut off in Tanzania. But we are trying as much as we can to make sure that, it comes a day where, we don't talk about persons with albinism being killed, but to answer the question, yes, there's still some African parts where persons with albinism are being killed.
Okay, thank you so much, Gwen. So Brenda is saying is a book that she wrote on her personal experiences titled Taught by Experience. So it's coming out soon. So I think it would be good to read the book. It is about people who live with albinism. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone who just joined and all the presenters. I can see that we have some burning questions. I believe our organizers will just do something for us so that we can have, let's say, one day to discuss this issue and to take further steps. I'll leave this time to Samantha to give us the closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's someone who's speaking.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add something before you say your closing remarks. Maybe if you allow me to.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So there was a question which was raised on what organizations are doing in terms of raising awareness on issues around albinism and inclusion. I think there is a huge danger of a one-told story, and there is need for us to come together. And I believe that collaborations will actually help us amplify the message in terms of telling the story about people living with albinism, and also telling the story about people living with disabilities, and also the need for inclusion in all sectors, be it conservation, be it the business industry. So I think as organizations, we have been challenged to actually take it up to ourselves and collaborate, work together, and put in place conditions that are conducive for people living with albinism to actually be able to be meaningful contributors to conservation of biodiversity, as well as climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I think for starters, there is need for us to keep on coming together, putting our hands together, sharing what we are doing in different areas and different sectors, and work together to actually promote inclusion from all sectors. I think that's what I had to respond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tapiwa, for the contribution. I think as the organization, we have to work together for that. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you so much. This whole webinar has just been so, sorry, my apologies. I just wanted to say that the webinar was really, it was really, an awakening, even for me. And I want to thank everybody who was involved in the organizing, also in the presentations. Thank you so much, Gwen Mushonga. Thank you, Taurai Chako. And thank you also to Brenda Mhlanga. You guys really, really raised awareness a lot today. And I'm grateful for the gains, especially the ones that Taurai was also speaking about on Zupco. Those who know of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it talks about awareness raising. Since disability is a revolving concept, there is no time where we should rest from awareness raising. It also talks in the SDGs also speak about collaboration, partnerships. And I think this is also very key and something that has been echoed in this meeting a lot. So I look forward to more collaboration. Some we have already started interacting on Twitter, and all the way from Uganda, from Zambia. I really like this collaboration from all the countries. you know, we must, as the theme is going today, uniting to make the voices of persons with disabilities and albinism in particular be heard. So I'm looking forward to more collaboration. Let's keep our ears open because we are also planning a tree planting day in 3 cities. And I hope that you can also join beyond this meeting. You know, I really resent some of the meetings where we just come and just talk without action. So I believe that this is the action that we require. Melissa, thank you so much for moderating, you know, with such passion and with such control over everything. And I want to wish you guys a happy International Albinism Awareness Day. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.